So I wanted to invite Rui Tavares now to respond to these two excellent talks this morning, and perhaps to give some perspective about the political acts we can take. You're a parliamentarian after all, thinking all the time about how we can act through this parliament and as citizens to improve democracy and address some of the questions that have been raised. So I hope we can move to that. Rui.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you to Rosi and Engin for your excellent presentations. I have to confess that genetically I'm someone who only wakes up in the afternoon. So today I woke up in the morning with both your presentations. So it's very good. You really, as Niccolo had promised, you got me thinking. Well, my first point would be the following: we are finally living a crisis, a real one, not crisis as this kind of new normal that we've gotten used to. We are always in a crisis. Well, at least I come from Portugal, and there may have been 2 or 3 years in the 90s where we haven't referred to our country as being in a crisis. Since I was born in 72, 2 years before the revolution. But crisis in its original sense, which is a medical one, is that point, that turning point in a patient's evolution, where the patient can either go very wrong or recover and go very, very well. The patient can die, or he or she can get a new lease of life, and a new life after that. So that's what crisis usually meant. It's that acute phase in a disease. And it is a medical term originally. So this is really where we're at. In many ways, it reminds me of 100 years ago, 1913. The months and years before World War I, the Great War, the war that we don't understand how it started, because World War II, everybody has a nice encapsulated narrative about it, but what about the Great War? What about La Guerre de 14-18? It's, how did it actually start? And once we follow the events that preceded this war, what we see is lots of very intelligent people, very skilled politicians, diplomats, academics, party leaders, dealing with some of the issues that we are dealing today. The first globalization of the 19th century, how to establish the limits between democracy and constitutionalism, what to make of people who lived in empires. Now I'm only talking about intra-European empires of different ethnic, cultural, linguistic origins, but that lived together and were subjects of the same emperors. So we have Italian writers and politicians who their first posts as representatives in the parliament was in Vienna, not Rome. We have French president in 1913 was actually from Alsace-Lorraine, who was then German, of course. And 1913 was a difficult year with lots of unexpected events like the ones that we have today with Cyprus and others. But 1914 was actually a calm and peaceful year until July. In May and June, everybody thought that peace was granted, and finally there was agreement, and the French president had dinner with the German ambassador, and the Kaiser had dinner with the French ambassador, and the French president had been in St. Petersburg with the Tsar, and everything seemed to, be finally, it was like a Draghi phase in the Euro crisis. Everything got stabilized. The acute phase of the crisis had stabilized. Well, of course, then you have this assassination in Sarajevo. 4 days later, you have maybe one of these naive people, like Rosi calls herself, by the name of Jean Jaurès, the leader of the French socialists, striving for peace, talking about peace, asking the workers of Europe to strike together and to not work for national powers at war. And he was killed 4 days after Franz Ferdinand was killed in Sarajevo, and Jean Jaurès, so Franz Ferdinand in a way is the last victim of the peace and Jean Jaurès the first of the war. Of course, the war started in August. Everybody thought, well, the boys will be home by Christmas. By Christmas, 1 million of them were dead, and the war went on for 4 years. Then we have the peace, and there's a book that I think should be part of the European cultural heritage, which is The Economic Consequences of Peace of by John Maynard Keynes. He was there, young, yeah, I think he was 35. Later on he said that until 35 our ideological landscape gets crystallized, so his ideological landscape got crystallized in the Versailles negotiations. And he was saying again, very clever people, Lloyd George, Clemenceau, Woodrow Wilson, negotiating a peace that was patently creating the conditions for a new war. And then we had a new war, and then we had a divided Europe, and we all thought that this would have ended by '89 because Europe was no more commanded from Washington and Moscow, and Europe could decide on its own destiny. And as it happens with many people that are finally free and they can decide on their own destiny, we didn't know what to do. We were used to being divided. I don't know if you've read this novel by Italo Calvino called The Cloven Viscount, who tells the story of a viscount that goes to war against the Turks, and in Bohemia he gets caught by a cannon bullet and divided into two. And one of his halves is recovered by Christian monks and survives, and the other half by Negromans from the Turkish side, and it survives. And then the Viscount has two living halves, one good, one bad, one vicious, one virtuous. They both come back to the Viscount's village in Italy, and the story is told in the 18th century, but of course it was written in the Italian 50s by a communist intellectual that then would leave the Communist Party after the invasion of Hungary. And he was talking about, once again, the soul of Europe being divided into two, each of the halves thinking that I am the virtuous one, you are the vicious one. Incredibly, we are at it again. Two halves, one is virtuous, spares money, works a lot, exports a lot. The other, in the south, is vicious, has spent too much, has indebted itself, etc. Of course, go read Calvino's novel, but you cannot function with two halves that are always fighting each other and thinking that I am the virtuous one and the other is the vicious one, because of course the southern half in our case sometimes also thinks that the other is the vicious one. We see all the Nazi signs in Nicosia or Athens. But we've gotten another effect of this division, which was a divided left. In the 19th century, by and large, we had a plural left, but that was a continuum. You had your Marx, of course, but your Proudhon, your Tolstoy, your Kropotkin, your Blanqui, your Garibaldi. It was a plural left with many voices, a choral left, sometimes a cacophonic left. But after the First World War, with the entry of a world power that was the former Russian Empire that had a monopoly over a certain part of the left, we got a divided left with a revolutionary arm and a reformist arm. And we still have that. And this is one of the reasons why you can have a left social majority in Brazil, in Venezuela, even in the United States. You don't have one in Europe. You have a kind of permanent conservative majority of the EPP in this continent, and now you have it in all governments, etc. And both these lefts have gotten spent. The reformist left does not reform anymore, and the revolutionary left is completely pseudo-revolutionary. They don't revolutionize anymore, because they have this idea that the system is a kind of an indivisive reality. So if you substitute it in one go, like uninstalling and installing a new system in your computer. Well, reality is just not like that. It's much more complex than that. I have concocted a new term for what I think how I think we should overcome. I don't think that we should try to make amends, make peace between the revolutionary and the reformist left. They just don't want. They will give you all kinds of excuses they don't want to have peace among them. We have to overcome that division, and I've concocted this term, which is we need a reformulationary left. I'm the creator of the term, and even I have difficulties in saying it, but you get the point. It's more than just making a portmanteau of reformism and revolution, although it's a perfect portmanteau, but it's more about reformulating the rules of the game from the beginning, from the ground up, reformulating the ways our parties work, reformulating the ways our countries work, reformulating the ways of transnational democracy as well. Well, yesterday I was in a debate, and once again we were talking about European values. I tend to have a minimalistic version of European values. For me, European values are actually not European values, are values of the Union, the values that we have in the treaty. So I'm going to be very legalistic here. Article 2, the Union is founded on the values of respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. The first attempt at this sentence was by the Hungarians, wanted the rights of minorities, and then it ended up being the rights of persons belonging to minorities, which is a crucial difference. Those values are common to the member states in a society in which pluralism, non-discrimination, tolerance, justice, solidarity, and equality between women and men prevail. Okay, the values of the Union. They are on paper, we have to make them concrete. And maybe we have to make them concrete via the real existing European values. Values like the Champions League or kebab or Eurovision or having public TVs and unemployment subsidies. But maybe the person in the world that I've heard, as Engin was saying, well, I as a Portuguese, I'm a little bit Brazilian, and the person in the world that has, in my way, in my thinking, most clearly defined European values was Lula, the former Brazilian president. When this crisis started, he said, you cannot let Europe be destroyed by this, because Europe is a heritage of the humanity. He used the word in Portuguese that we use to refer to the World Cultural Sites of the UNESCO, Património da Humanidade. What he was referring to is this continent where you've managed to have relatively free, relatively democratic societies, but also with a welfare state, with social provisions, with the kind of things that that are not specifically European. They are not better because they are European, they are better because they allow for more emancipation, they allow for more personal sovereignty. You cannot just let the crisis destroy that. Okay, what can we do? I think that here we would need to have the help of our original characters in European and actually in also world culture. And the one that I want to refer to is Ulysses. Ulysses, that by the way was the nickname that Altiero Spinelli liked using about himself. Well, there's a passage in the Odyssey where Ulysses' sailors are transformed into pigs by a sorcerer, Kirke. And this passage has always, or as since the beginning of this crisis, looked to me very, very fruitful in a metaphoric sense, because our countries in Southern Europe were also transformed into pigs, you know the acronym, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain, and now there's Cyprus. And they were not transformed into pigs by Kirky, but into pigs by the crisis. We are gotten used to be called this dehumanizing name in the press. I remember when I studied in France, I was always very depressed that my country was never in the news. I said, nobody cares about Portugal. I never see Portugal in the news. Well, when I came here, I started to see Portugal in the front page of the Financial Times, and it's not good. And, you know, in this acronym, I miss the old times where nobody cared about us. So, what can we do? We can create a Ulysses project, and this we can draw it ourselves. That would be for a European New Deal, like the Tennessee Valley Authority was for the American South in the Great Depression, because this has already happened in the past. These states around the Tennessee Valley, they were not only left behind because of the Great Depression, but also mechanization of the agriculture, their own social problems with clienteles and segregation and racism and all that. And people were fleeing, as you can read in the Grapes of Wrath of John Steinbeck. They were leaving these states in droves, as they are in my own country. If I weren't here, I would probably have emigrated by now. Lots of our young, educated people that we've spent most of the effort and most of the money of the country after '74 are now in Brazil and Angola, which is good in a way, but it will make, if it continues this way and they don't come back, Portugal will be also split in half, with older people dependent on the social instruments of the state and less educated people that cannot find their way in the kind of economy that we have. So what can we do? What should the Ulysses project propose? Well, for instance, federal universities. You know, the Brazilians do it. Why doesn't the European University does that? Why don't we say to the Cypriots, and I'm talking about both Cypriots, Turkish and Greeks, that are now under this shock of what happened, and what will we do? Well, let's put a European university, a big one, not like the European Institute in Fiesole for 1,000 postgraduates, one for young people, young graduates coming from the 28 member states, and also why not from the other side of the Mediterranean. But mostly, this university has to cater to both Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots. Why not? At least it will give people one idea of why will they be in the euro. Since this crisis started, I've heard many times, Greece will stay in the euro, Portugal will stay in the euro, and now Cyprus will stay in the euro. But I've never heard Barroso or Van Rompuy or Merkel or anybody say Portugal will stay in the euro because there's something that Portugal can do in the euro, because there is a positive role for you, because you can export renewable energies, or you have an excellent link with African Brazil or whatever. Greece will stay in the euro because there is something for Greeks to do in the euro. People don't like to feel as they're just the passive end of policies that they by and large haven't decided on. What can we do other than a Ulysses project, a Ulysses movement that could even say even more outlandish things, that for instance that Israel and Palestine could be offered membership of the Union if they get their act together, and we have two states living side by side. Why not? It's about 10 or 12 million people. They'll get their 22 MEPs and access to the single market and later on Schengen. Why not even Lebanon? Because actually Europe comes from Lebanon. Europa was a Lebanese princess raped and a refugee in a sense. Well, what could we do even more than that. We could and should reclaim European democracy as a big reformist or revolutionary or reformulationary project. And this project, in a way, and here I'm following an insight of Etienne Balibar, should not only be a democracy like the democracies that we know, but a democracy like the democracies that we should have in the 21st century. So a more democratic democracy. I'll give you some examples and then we can discuss. Well, a classical democracy has every year a speech of the State of the Union. Obama does that, Barroso has imitated that, we have the State of the Union. A more democratic democracy should have a debate of the Union every year with the citizens and could organize it with the tools of deliberative democracy. A democratic democracy has what we already have, which is a citizens' initiative. You collect 1 million signatures, you give that to the Commission with a proposal, and the Commission can say yes or no. Well, a more democratic democracy will give the power to citizens, and this is a very recent idea that people organizing this session, and I was not part of this conversation, had even yesterday. Why not the judicial citizens' initiative? If 5% of the Portuguese could go to the ECJ, to the Court of Justice of the European Union, well, I guarantee you, we would get 5% of the Portuguese signatures to put the Troika in court, because Article 3 of the treaties says that the Union's aims, so these 2 is the Union's values, here is the Union's aims, is to promote peace, its values, and the well-being of its people. And then, in number 3, you have aiming at full employment. So maybe there's a case against the Troika in the ECJ. And if we had a more democratic democracy, we could go to the ECJ with 5% of the signatures, and this would, of course, also give the occasion for an ecosystem of civil liberties unions and lawyers and jurists associations to form in order to build these cases and then collect the signatures and go to court. We should have citizens' pilot projects. MEPs can present here in the Parliament every year pilot projects of up to 3 million euros that are not under any other budget line of the Union's budget. If one MEP can do it, why not 25,000 citizens can do it? And then it would follow the same procedures that we have here in Parliament. And above all, we should have a democratic pact of the European citizens. A very simple thing in the Spinellian way, saying that we, the citizens of Europe and the world, will strive for European democracy through simple, concrete, and decisive steps. If we have to change the treaties for that, okay, that will be part of our goals. But if we can get whatever we think that we should get without changing the treaties, for instance, electing the European executive, which may or not be the Commission, that's another question. Well, we can do that indirectly with the elections just next year. There was a resolution last year in Parliament, and I managed to insert an amendment there that it says that candidates to the presidency of the Commission should have a program and personally present that program in all the member states of the Union. If not, we'll have a so-called pan-European campaign between Berlin, Paris, and maybe London. But if we want, for instance, to turn the Council into a Senate, some people will say, well, you can do that, it's not in the treaties. But actually, nothing stops our member states from electing the 2 ambassadors that we have in the Council. It does not say there that they cannot be elected. So I'm proposing this in Portugal, and this argument now is being adopted by not many people, but it's starting to be adopted. Why not elect these 2 ambassadors in Council? Actually, if you remember the story of the American Senate, the senators were not elected. Actually, they were almost sold by the governors from the independence of the United States until 1913. And then a state that was not a very important one at the time, Oregon, decided to elect their senators. In 3 years, the other 47 states followed, because if Oregon can do it, why cannot California? Why cannot, etc.? And that's the best part. We can do all of this. You know, a democratic pact signed by European citizens, intellectuals, activists, and not only European, also people from around the world, is something that, you know, we cannot change, we cannot sit here together and change the treaties, but we can sign a pact between ourselves and pledge ourselves to this project of building a transnational democracy. Not because, and to make a link with the Orientalism, not because of any kind of European suprematism, not because Europe is best, but because it can be a good laboratory for transnational democracy in the rest of the world, or in the whole world, in the pursuit of the old Kantian dream of emancipation and peace in the world. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much for hearing it.